Ethan Montgomery wasn't what most people would call the typical student at Greenvale High. He wasn't the athlete with a perfect smile, nor was he the class clown that everyone adored. No, Ethan was quiet, painfully quiet. He spent most of his days at the back of classrooms, scribbling in notebooks and staring out of windows. The world around him was something he observed more than participated in. Social interactions were a nightmare, his anxiety crippling whenever he had to engage in even the simplest conversations. It wasn't that he didn't want to make friends. He did, desperately. But every time he tried to speak to someone, the words seemed to get stuck in his throat, tangled in his thoughts. Ethan was used to the silence, used to the feeling of standing at the sidelines while the rest of the world moved on without him. One Tuesday morning, just as the bell rang signaling the start of a new semester, Ethan shuffled into his first class of the day, physics. His bag was slung over his shoulder, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. He found his usual seat near the back and set up his books, wishing for nothing more than to fade into the background. That was when she walked in. Her name was Lyra, a name that seemed to carry an air of mystery with it. She had long, shimmering hair the color of silver starlight, and her eyes bright, violet eyes shone with an intensity that was out of place in the mundane school environment. She wasn't dressed in the standard school uniform like everyone else. Instead, she wore something sleek and unusual, a tailored coat of dark blue with hints of metallic silver woven into the fabric, as though it were designed for a much different climate. She stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room, her gaze sweeping across the students with a keen, almost calculating expression. Then, as though deciding something in her mind, she walked toward the desk next to Ethan and sat down without a word. Ethan froze. There was something undeniably otherworldly about her presence, something that made the air around her feel charged. And despite his best attempts to focus on his work, Ethan couldn't tear his gaze away. It wasn't just the way she looked, it was the way she moved, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence and a kind of grace that seemed beyond human. She didn't seem like she belonged here. Not at all. Lyra pulled out a sleek, black tablet and began scribbling notes with quick precision. Ethan couldn't help but glance at her from time to time, feeling an odd mix of curiosity and discomfort. He had never been good at talking to new people, but this girl, she was different. There was something about her that made him want to speak to her, but the words were stuck just like always. It wasn't until halfway through the class that she looked up and caught him staring. Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile, and for the first time in ages, Ethan felt a spark of warmth. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind of attention he was used to, it was something more inviting. "Hi," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, as though every syllable was carefully chosen. Ethan blinked, feeling his heart race. "Hi," he managed, his voice a little higher than he intended. She leaned in just slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I'm Lyra." "You're Ethan, right?" "Why, yeah," Ethan replied, trying to keep his hands from shaking. "I mean, yeah, that's me." There was a pause, as if she were studying him. "You're not the talkative type, are you?" she asked, her tone more of an observation than a question. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't really like talking much," he admitted, feeling his face turn red. It's easier to just be quiet." Lyra nodded thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving his. "I get it," she said, her smile never fading. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words." The bell rang, and the class began to disperse, but Lyra didn't move. She turned to Ethan again, this time more casually. "Do you want to sit with me at lunch?" she asked, her gaze soft but purposeful. Ethan was taken aback. No one had ever asked him to sit with them. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had taken an interest in him, much less the new girl with the violet eyes. But something about Lyra made him want to say yes, to take a chance. For the first time, he felt the possibility of something more, of friendship, perhaps. "Sure," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in his chest. Lunch came quicker than expected, and as Ethan entered the cafeteria, he scanned the room for Lyra. He was nervous. His usual seat at the back of the cafeteria seemed like the safest option, but he had agreed to sit with her. His eyes landed on her instantly. She was sitting alone at a table near the window, her tablet in front of her as usual, but this time she was waiting patiently for him. Ethan walked over cautiously, taking a seat across from her. She smiled warmly, as if his presence was the most natural thing in the world. "You came," she said, her voice light. I said I would," Ethan replied, a little unsure of what to say next. Lyra chuckled softly, her laugh like a melody that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. "True. I suppose you did." They sat in an easy silence, and for a few moments, Ethan forgot all about his usual anxiety. Lyra's presence was calming, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was as if she understood him, understood the quiet that lingered in his mind, without needing to fill the space with meaningless chatter. Lyra was the one who broke the silence first. "So, tell me about yourself, Ethan," she said, looking at him with genuine interest. He glanced down at his food, unsure of how to start. "I don't really have much to tell. I'm just normal, I guess." Lyra tilted her head, her violet eyes thoughtful. "Normal? What does that mean, exactly? You seem interesting to me." Ethan's face flushed again, but he couldn't help but feel a little flattered by her words. "I guess I'm just quiet. Not much going on in my life." "You don't have to be loud to be interesting," Lyra replied softly. "Sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones who see the most." Ethan met her gaze for the first time, and something about the way she looked at him made him feel important, as though his silence wasn't a flaw, but a strength. They sat together, talking about everything and nothing about books, music, and strange things that Lyra had seen in the world. She had a way of speaking about things that made them sound mysterious, magical even, as though the world held wonders beyond what he had ever imagined. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Lyra's bond grew stronger. He found himself looking forward to their lunches together, those quiet moments when the world seemed to fade away. Lyra was patient with him, never pushing him to speak more than he was comfortable with. Her presence became a constant source of comfort, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt seen. However, despite their growing friendship, there were things about Lyra that didn't quite add up. For one, she seemed to know far more than she let on. There were moments when she would refer to places and events as though she had experienced them firsthand, despite their being clearly beyond the scope of what any high school student could have experienced. It wasn't long before Ethan started to notice strange little details that didn't quite fit. Sometimes, when Lyra thought no one was looking, her gaze would become distant, almost as if she were watching something that wasn't there. And on a few occasions, Ethan could have sworn he saw flashes of light around her, subtle, almost imperceptible, but there. One afternoon, after school, Ethan found himself walking home alone when he spotted Lyra across the street, talking to a group of unfamiliar people. They were dressed in dark, tailored outfits, and their conversation seemed serious, almost too serious for a group of high school students. He tried to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine, but his curiosity got the better of him. He hid behind a tree and watched, barely breathing as Lyra spoke with the group. She seemed to be giving orders. Her posture and the way she carried herself were so different from the friendly, approachable girl he knew. She was commanding, authoritative. Then, just as quickly as the conversation had begun, the group scattered, leaving Lyra standing alone in the street. She looked up and caught Ethan watching from behind the tree. Her expression softened, and she began to approach him with that same quiet grace. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm. "You saw that, didn't you?" He froze, unsure of what to say. His heart was pounding in his chest. "I wasn't spying or anything, I know," she interrupted with a soft smile. "You're just curious." "Who were they?" Ethan asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "What was that all about?" Lyra paused for a moment, her expression unreadable. There's something you should know, Ethan. About me. I'm not just some normal student here. Ethan's mind raced. What do you mean? She looked around, making sure no one else was nearby, and then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not from here. I'm not even human. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. You're not human? Lyra nodded, her violet eyes serious. I'm a bodyguard. I've been assigned to protect someone important, and I'm here in disguise. Ethan stared at her in disbelief, his world spinning. He had so many questions, but the most pressing one was, why him? Why had she chosen to befriend him? Before he could ask, Lyra placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. I trusted you enough to tell you this. But understand, Ethan, there's much more at play here than you can imagine. And you're about to find out just how deep it goes. Ethan's heart raced, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had no idea what he was about to get himself into, but one thing was certain, his life was never going to be the same again. Days passed since Lyra's confession, and Ethan's life took a strange, unexpected turn. She became even more distant in some ways, almost as if she were carrying a burden too heavy to share. The once easy friendship between them now felt strained, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He was more than just a shy, quiet boy now. He was tangled up in a mystery that involved royal bodyguards, hidden secrets, and a girl who was far from ordinary. But despite everything, Ethan couldn't bring himself to stay away from her. There was something magnetic about Lyra, something he couldn't quite explain. Despite the danger that seemed to follow her, despite the fact that she wasn't human, he felt a deep, unshakable connection to her. And, as it turned out, that connection would prove to be more important than either of them could have imagined. Chapter 4: The Secret Beneath the Surface. The days that followed Lyra's confession were filled with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. Ethan could no longer view his quiet, normal life in the same way. He found himself constantly questioning everything, the subtle things about Lyra, her mysterious conversations, the way she seemed to exist on the edge of the ordinary and the extraordinary. She wasn't just an unusual new student, she was a complex puzzle, one that Ethan wasn't sure he was prepared to solve. But even as the questions mounted, he couldn't stay away from her. Each day, he found himself gravitating toward her, sitting together at lunch, walking home after school, sharing small moments of silence, just like they had before. But now, that silence was different. It was filled with unspoken understanding. Lyra was hiding something. And Ethan wanted to know what it was. The following Thursday, after another day of school, Ethan found himself walking toward the park where he often met Lyra. It was a quiet spot perfect for the kind of conversations that needed time and space to unfold. As he neared the old oak tree where they usually met, he saw Lyra standing there, her back turned to him, gazing at the sky. For a moment, she appeared almost ethereal, her silver hair catching the light of the setting sun. Lyra? Ethan called out hesitantly. She turned toward him, and for a brief second, Ethan could have sworn that he saw a flicker of something in intensity behind her usual calm demeanor. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by her familiar, soft smile. Hey, Ethan, she said, her voice warm, but her eyes were distant. Ethan stepped forward, his heart racing. There was so much he wanted to ask her, so many pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. But he didn't want to push her too hard. He didn't want to scare her off. I have been thinking about what you said, he began, his voice nervous. About you being not human. Lyra's smile faded slightly, and she motioned for him to sit beside her under the tree. Ethan complied, sitting down, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap. He wanted to look at her, to make sense of the strange energy that seemed to pulse around her, but he wasn't sure how to approach the subject. I know it's a lot to take in, Lyra said, her voice softer now. I didn't want to tell you at first, but it feels like you're different from the others. I trust you, Ethan. I hope you know that. Ethan nodded, still unsure of what to say next. You said you were a bodyguard. But what does that mean, exactly? Who are you protecting? Lyra hesitated, her eyes darting to the horizon as though searching for something in the distance. I can't tell you everything right now, she said, her tone turning serious. But I can tell you this, the person I'm protecting is someone very important. Someone whose safety is vital to the balance of power in a far greater world than anything you've ever known. Ethan's brow furrowed. A royal? Is that what you mean? Lyra's gaze snapped to him, her violet eyes sharp, as if weighing his words carefully. After a moment, she gave a reluctant nod. Yes. In a way, you could say that. Ethan's mind raced. He tried to imagine what kind of person could need a bodyguard as skilled as Lyra, someone so capable of blending in and protecting her charge without drawing attention. But the more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. There was a larger world, one that was beyond his comprehension, hidden just beneath the surface of his ordinary life. Lyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. There are forces out there that want to destroy what we're protecting. Forces that will stop at nothing to plunge entire civilizations into chaos. I'm not just here because I was assigned to be, I'm here because the safety of this world and many others depends on it. Ethan could feel the gravity of her words settling in the air between them. It wasn't just a schoolgirl's fantasy, not a whimsical story. This was real danger, real stakes. But if you're protecting someone important, Ethan started, his heart pounding, why are you here? In this school? It's not exactly the safest place. Lyra turned to face him fully now, her eyes locking with his, intense and resolute. Because the danger isn't always where you think it is, she said quietly. The threats are subtle. They blend in. And sometimes, the people you least expect are the ones who are trying to destroy everything. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. And you think someone here is involved in all of this? At school? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small, metallic device. It looked like nothing more than a simple piece of technology, an advanced communicator of some kind, maybe. She pressed a button, and a holographic image flickered into view, a projection of a map that seemed to stretch across the galaxy, with pinpoint markers flashing at various locations. This, Lyra said, her tone grave, is just a small part of what's at stake. These are coordinates. Hidden places, places of power. And one of them is here, on Earth. Ethan stared at the map, his mind struggling to make sense of what she was showing him. You mean, there's something important here? On Earth? Lyra nodded. Yes. Something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. And someone is after it. They've already begun moving, making their way here. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His mind struggled to catch up with her words. But how does this all connect to you? To your royal charge? Because the person I'm protecting, Lyra said softly, is the key to stopping them. The weight of her words hit Ethan like a tidal wave. For the first time, everything seemed to make sense, and yet, it was so much bigger than anything he could have imagined. He wasn't just friends with a strange girl at school, he was entangled in a cosmic struggle, a battle between forces he couldn't even begin to understand. I don't know what to do, Ethan admitted, his voice trembling slightly. I'm just a regular kid. I'm not part of this. You don't have to be, Lyra replied, her eyes softening. But you've already become part of it, whether you want to be or not. And right now, I need your help. Ethan looked at her, still reeling from the weight of the situation. He wasn't sure how much he could offer, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't walk away. Lyra had been there for him when no one else had. She'd been kind, patient, and now she was asking for his help. He couldn't turn his back on her. What do you need me to do? He asked quietly. Lyra's smile returned, but it was tinged with something more somber now. We need to find the one behind all this before it's too late. We need to stop them before the galaxy falls into darkness. As the days passed, Ethan found himself pulled deeper into the mysterious world Lyra had revealed to him. The small, quiet school he had always known was now just a fade, a veil over something far greater and ancient power, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. Lyra became more cautious, her movements more deliberate, as if she were always watching for something just beyond the horizon. But despite the danger that seemed to loom over them, she was still the same girl Ethan had befriended. She still smiled at him, still talked with him, and shared those quiet moments together. But now, those moments felt like stolen breaths before the storm. And he felt himself changing. He was no longer the shy, quiet boy who had hidden from the world. He was becoming a part of something larger, something that mattered. He was no longer standing on the sidelines, he was part of the story, a piece of the puzzle. Lyra had confided in him, trusted him with the truth. And now, Ethan would do whatever it took to stand by her side. They were no longer just classmates. They were allies, partners in a fight they hadn't chosen, but one they would have to face together. And neither of them knew just how dangerous that fight would be. Chapter 6: Unlikely Allies. The days following Ethan's commitment to helping Lyra were a whirlwind of strange encounters and cryptic warnings. Every time they met after school, she spoke in guarded tones, her eyes scanning the surroundings as though expecting danger to emerge from every corner. There were subtle changes in her demeanor, too. The friendly, approachable girl he had grown accustomed to was still there, but there was now a layer of tension, a seriousness that hadn't been present before. Ethan knew that the gravity of their situation was becoming more urgent, but it didn't make it any easier to process. He had always been content with his quiet life, the solitude he'd built around himself. Now, he was being thrust into something far beyond his comprehension. But every time Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes sharp with determination, yet still warm, he felt a strange sense of purpose, a belief that maybe he was meant to be part of this, even if it didn't make sense. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the city, Lyra pulled Ethan aside near a small alley between two buildings. The evening air was cool, but there was an undeniable tension in the atmosphere. "We need to be careful," she said, her voice low and urgent. "There's a mole in the school. Someone who's working against us." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A mole? In school? But who? Lyra glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. "I don't know who, but I've been tracking their movements. Whoever it is, they've been watching us. We need to move carefully, Ethan. I can't afford to be caught off guard." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. It was hard to imagine anyone at school being involved in something so dangerous. But then again, he realized, that was exactly how conspiracies worked. The enemy was never who you thought it was. "Do you have any idea what they're after?" Ethan asked, trying to gather his thoughts. "Is it the power you're protecting?" Lyra hesitated before responding, her gaze distant. "Yes. They're after the artifact, the one that holds the key to everything. The artifact that has the power to tip the balance of the galaxy." Ethan blinked. "The artifact? Is it here? In the school?" Lyra nodded, her expression grave. "It's hidden somewhere nearby. I've been trying to locate it for weeks, but whoever is after it is moving faster than I anticipated." Ethan felt a wave of confusion wash over him. If it's so important, why hasn't someone else found it? Why is it still here? Lyra's gaze softened, but her eyes were still filled with the weight of responsibility. "Because it's been protected for centuries. Only a few people know its true location, and it's hidden in a way that makes it nearly impossible to find without the right key. And I'm the one who has that key." Ethan swallowed hard. "So, you're saying you're the only one who can access it?" "Yes," Lyra said firmly. "But I can't do it alone. I need your help." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "What can I do? I'm just a regular guy." What help can I possibly be in all of this? Lyra smiled faintly. You'd be surprised what a regular person can do when they're in the right place at the right time. The artifact isn't just something that can be found, it needs to be activated. It requires a specific set of abilities, a particular bond between its protector and its finder. Me? Ethan asked, his voice shaky. You think I have the ability to activate it? Lyra's gaze was intense as she met his eyes. I do. You've already proven that you're more than just a bystander. I've seen something in you, Ethan. Something I can't explain. But it's there. Ethan's head spun. Was she really asking him to play a part in this? To help her protect something so powerful? To step into a world he didn't understand and risk everything? But as he looked into her eyes, he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't turn his back on her. Not now. Not after everything she had shared with him. She had trusted him with a secret that was bigger than anything he could have imagined. And now, he couldn't leave her to face it alone. I'll do it, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's smile was small but genuine. I knew I could count on you. The next few days were filled with a strange mix of heightened caution and quiet anticipation. Lyra had explained that the artifact was hidden within the school grounds, somewhere no one would ever think to look. She had spent months gathering information, scanning for clues, but now, with the growing threat, they had to act fast. They began their search after school, keeping their movements subtle. Lyra's methods were precise. She knew how to blend in, how to move unnoticed, and she taught Ethan how to do the same. They explored the school building's many nooks and crannies, the hidden passages beneath the floors, and the rooms that most students never visited. Every time they uncovered something new, Ethan's excitement grew. They were closer than they'd ever been. But with every step, the danger seemed to grow more palpable. The presence of the mole was always in the back of Lyra's mind, and Ethan could feel the weight of it pressing down on them. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. One afternoon, as the last bell rang and the halls emptied out, Lyra led Ethan into the basement of the school. The flickering lights above cast long shadows on the concrete walls, and the air smelled musty. But there was a palpable energy in the air that Ethan couldn't ignore. This is it, Lyra said quietly, her eyes scanning the walls. It has to be down here. Ethan followed her, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. They reached a narrow hallway at the end of the basement, where a large, old door stood slightly ajar. Lyra glanced at Ethan, her eyes serious. Stay close, she whispered. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest as they stepped into the room. It was cold, colder than the rest of the building, and there was a strange energy in the air. At the far end of the room stood an ornate pedestal, covered in dust. On it rested an object wrapped in ancient-looking cloth. Lyra walked toward it slowly, her movements careful. As she approached, the air around her seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible vibration, like the room itself recognized her presence. She reached out and gently lifted the cloth, revealing an intricate, glowing crystal, its surface pulsing with a soft light. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was beautiful, and yet there was something unsettling about it. This is it, Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. The artifact. The crystal hummed louder now, as though it were alive. And suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from behind them. Lyra whipped around, her eyes narrowing as she raised her hand defensively. Ethan turned just in time to see a figure stepping into the room. A figure cloaked in shadow, their face hidden beneath a hood. They moved with the precision of a predator, and as they stepped forward, Ethan felt a chill wash over him. It was the mole. Lyra stepped between Ethan and the stranger, her stance defensive. You shouldn't have followed us, she said, her voice cold. The stranger's laugh echoed through the room. You think you can hide it from me? You're not the only one with eyes in this place, Lyra. Ethan's heart raced as the stranger moved closer. He could feel the danger now, the very real threat that hung in the air. This wasn't just a game anymore. Lives were on the line. And Ethan realized that, Just by being here, he had become a part of this struggle whether he was ready for it or not. "Step aside, Lyra," the stranger said, his voice low and menacing. "The artifact belongs to someone far more powerful than you." Lyra's eyes blazed with fury. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Ethan took a step back, his hands trembling. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't trained for this, wasn't prepared to face someone like this. But as the figure moved closer, he realized something. Lyra wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for something far greater, something he couldn't yet fully comprehend. And he wasn't about to stand by and let her fight alone. Ethan took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he had to do something. He reached out, grabbing the glowing crystal from the pedestal before Lyra could stop him. As his fingers touched the surface, the room seemed to explode with light, the air crackling with energy. The crystal pulsed in his hand, and Ethan felt a surge of power rush through him. The stranger recoiled, his eyes wide with shock. "No, it can't be." Lyra turned toward Ethan, her expression a mixture of surprise and pride. "Ethan, you activated it." Before the stranger could react, Lyra launched herself at him, using her agility to move with lightning speed. In the chaos that followed, Ethan felt a new strength building within him, a sense of clarity. This wasn't just a fight for Lyra's charge anymore. This was a fight for the future. The enemy didn't know what was coming. A new beginning. The quiet streets of the school campus now felt different to Ethan. Where once there had been a sense of normalcy, an unspoken promise that life would carry on like it always had, now everything was charged with the understanding that nothing would ever be the same. Lyra had stayed with him after the confrontation, her presence grounding him in the midst of the chaos. She had explained the artifact's deeper significance, its connection to ancient powers, and its role in maintaining balance across the galaxy. The mysterious stranger who was revealed to be part of an underground faction that sought to control the artifact for malevolent purposes was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. As they walked along the familiar path to school, side by side, Ethan could feel the weight of their shared mission. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The crystal they had secured, though powerful, was not the only key to the dangerous forces that lurked beyond the edge of their world. There were more enemies, more dangers, and more revelations that waited just beyond the horizon. But for the first time, Ethan no longer felt lost in the face of it all. He wasn't just an observer to the extraordinary events unfolding around him. He was a part of it. "You okay?" Lyra asked, her voice gentle, but her gaze piercing as always. Ethan smiled, the uncertainty that once clouded his thoughts now replaced with a quiet confidence. "Yeah. Just taking it all in." She nodded. "I know it's a lot. But we're in this together. And together, we'll make sure that artifact stays where it belongs, protected, hidden, safe. As long as we stand side by side, no one can take it from us." "I know," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I trust you." She gave him a sidelong glance, her lips curling into a rare, playful smile. "You should. I'm the best bodyguard in the galaxy." Ethan chuckled. "I'll take your word for it." Despite the enormity of their task, despite the dangers that still loomed over them, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He wasn't alone in this. And that made all the difference. Lyra had shown him that he was capable of more than he ever thought possible, more than any regular person could ever hope to be. And together, they would protect the galaxy's secrets. The school bell rang in the distance, signaling the beginning of another day. Students filed into the building, their conversations and laughter creating the familiar hum of life. But as Ethan and Lyra approached the school entrance, he felt the pulse of something bigger, a world of hidden stories, waiting to unfold. The quiet human boy and the royal alien bodyguard had just begun their journey. What awaited them next was unknown, but one thing was certain, they would face it together. And whatever came next, they would be ready.